Some cases, they etch themselves into your memory not just for the cruelty involved, but for the chilling reminder of how little we can truly know what goes on behind closed doors. The one I'm about to recount began with the illusion of a new beginning, a honeymoon, a promise of shared happiness. It's a story that still makes me question the masks people wear. We see wedding photos, smiles, the perfect facade of a couple embarking on a life together. But beneath that veneer, sometimes a darkness festers, one that can turn a dream into an unimaginable nightmare almost overnight. This particular investigation forced us to confront a truth so brutal, so contrary to every expectation of love and marriage, that it shook even seasoned officers. Little did we know, as the first reports trickled in, that we were about to uncover a prison built within the very sanctuary of a home, a place where vows were twisted into chains. If you believe that no crime should go unpunished, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any archived cases. Your support is crucial. The couple, let's call them Laura and Mark, had just returned from what was supposed to be their idyllic honeymoon. Pictures shared with family showed sun-kissed smiles and romantic landscapes, but the glow of those photos faded almost immediately upon their return to their new home. The first call that eventually led us to this case wasn't a frantic plea for help. Not directly. It was a concerned neighbor, reporting unusual sounds, arguments that seemed to escalate quickly and then abruptly stop. At the time, it was logged as a potential domestic disturbance. Common enough, unfortunately. We didn't know then that Laura's honeymoon hadn't just ended. Her life as she knew it had been extinguished the moment she said, "I do." Mark, by all outward appearances, was charming, successful. He had swept Laura off her feet, but the investigation would later reveal that this charm was a carefully constructed performance. The first red flags, which Laura initially dismissed or tried to understand, began to wave almost immediately. He started by subtly criticizing her friends, then her family, suggesting they weren't good influences or didn't truly support their marriage. He'd make comments about her clothing, her opinions, slowly chipping away at her confidence. Her phone calls became monitored. Casual outings with her own friends became sources of intense interrogation when she returned. He'd insist on knowing every detail, twisting her words, making her feel guilty for wanting any life outside of him. The honeymoon period, if it ever truly existed for Laura, was brutally short. It was replaced by an insidious web of control, spun so skillfully that, from the outside, for a little while longer, their life still looked like a new beginning. We, the police, were still unaware of the true extent of the darkness brewing, but the seeds of unease were being sown in the neighborhood. Small whispers that hadn't yet formed into a coherent warning. The subtle manipulations soon gave way to something far more sinister. Mark's control tightened like a vice. Laura's access to the outside world was systematically severed. Her phone became his property, calls and messages screened, then forbidden altogether. Visits from her family were met with excuses, manufactured arguments, or Mark's ever-present, intimidating gaze, ensuring Laura said nothing but what he allowed. The house, once a symbol of their new life, transformed into her cage. We learned later, through painstaking investigation and piecing together fragmented accounts, that he began to lock her in rooms for hours, sometimes days, with minimal food and water. The psychological torment was relentless. He'd belittle her constantly, eroding her self-worth until she felt utterly dependent and deserving of his cruelty. He gaslighted her, denying his actions, making her question her own sanity. And then came the physical violence. It started with a shove, a slap, escalating with terrifying speed into daily beatings. She lived in a constant state of fear, anticipating the next outburst, the next explosion of rage over the slightest perceived infraction. A meal not to his liking, a look he misinterpreted. The evidence we would eventually gather painted a horrifying picture of this sustained, brutal campaign of abuse. Each day was a new cycle of fear, pain, and despair, hidden behind the drawn curtains of their suburban home. Those initial calls from the neighbor, they were cries in the dark, unheeded for too long because the monster was so adept at presenting a calm, reasonable face when officers did cursory checks, with Laura often too terrified to signal for help or simply not present during those brief interactions. What detail of this hidden torment do you find most chilling? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read everyone. Weeks, perhaps months, passed in this horrifying routine. Laura was completely cut off, a prisoner in her own home. The breakthrough, the moment her desperate situation finally pierced the veil of secrecy Mark had constructed, didn't come from a direct call from Laura herself. She was far too controlled for that. It came from her sister, Sarah. Sarah had grown increasingly worried. The excuses Mark gave for Laura's absence from family gatherings, for her unanswered calls and texts, had started to wear thin. They were too polished, too rehearsed. Sarah's intuition, a sister's bond, told her something was terribly wrong. She decided to pay an unannounced visit. Mark, caught off guard, couldn't prevent her from entering the house entirely, though he tried to steer her away from certain areas. It was during this tense visit that Sarah caught a fleeting glimpse of Laura, a shadow of her former self, pale, thin, with a haunted look in her eyes, and what looked like a poorly concealed bruise on her arm. Laura managed to slip a small, crumpled note into Sarah's hand as she was being ushered out by an increasingly agitated Mark. The note was short, terrifyingly simple. "Help me. He's going to kill me." Sarah didn't hesitate. She drove straight to our precinct, the note clutched in her trembling hand. Her testimony, raw and filled with a sister's anguish, provided the probable cause we desperately needed to do more than just a welfare check. The urgency in her voice, the terror in her eyes mirroring what she'd seen in Laura's, spurred us into immediate action. This wasn't just a domestic dispute anymore. This was a potential hostage situation, a life hanging precariously in the balance. We knew then that the carefully constructed facade of Mark's normal life was about to be shattered. Malice, we knew, often hid in plain sight, but the courage of one family member finally gave us the key to unlock the door. Armed with Sarah's statement and the desperate note, we obtained a warrant. The team moved quickly and quietly, approaching the house with a tactical plan. Mark answered the door, his usual charming demeanor firmly in place, feigning surprise and concern when we stated our purpose. He denied everything, of course, painting Sarah as hysterical and Laura as emotionally unstable, prone to exaggeration. He even attempted to block our entry, citing his rights, but the warrant was solid. As officers fanned out through the house, I kept Mark engaged, observing his reactions, the slight tremor in his hand, the flicker of panic in his eyes that he tried so hard to conceal. The key evidence, the turning point, wasn't just Laura's eventual, terrified testimony, which we took with extreme care and sensitivity once she was safe. It was what we found inside that house. One room at the back of the house was bare, except for a thin mattress on the floor. The window was boarded up from the inside. There were scratch marks on the inside of the door near the handle, as if someone had tried desperately to get out. We found a hidden journal Laura had managed to keep, documenting the escalating abuse, dates, specific incidents of violence, her fear, her despair. It was a harrowing account, written in a shaky hand, a chronicle of her imprisonment. And then there was the digital evidence. On Mark's computer, which he'd tried to wipe but our forensics team managed to recover, we found search histories, searches for ways to control, to dominate, even for untraceable poisons. We also found deleted photos, accidentally backed up to a cloud service he'd forgotten about, showing Laura with bruises at various stages of healing, stark visual proof that belied his claims of a happy marriage. Maliciously, he had even installed hidden cameras in certain rooms, not for security, but to monitor Laura's every move, further proof of his obsessive control. The journal, the state of that room, and the digital footprint, it all painted an undeniable picture. His carefully constructed world of lies was crumbling. Have you ever suspected the real culprit before the police did? Tell me in the comments when your suspicions were confirmed. With Laura safely out of the house and the evidence mounting, we brought Mark in for formal interrogation. In the sterile environment of the interview room, stripped of his domain and his props of control, his charming facade began to crack. Initially, he stuck to his denials, trying to manipulate the detectives with a practiced calm. But as we laid out the evidence piece by piece, the journal entries, the photographs of the room, the digital forensic reports, Laura's preliminary statement detailing the daily beatings and confinement, his composure visibly faltered. The questions became more pointed, the inconsistencies in his story more glaring. The confrontation wasn't a dramatic outburst, but a slow, methodical dismantling of his lies. We presented him with the search terms from his computer, the ones about controlling a spouse, about silent ways to inflict pain. His explanations grew weaker, his denials less convincing. The weight of his own actions, now exposed, seemed to press down on him. He never fully confessed in a flood of remorse. Men like him rarely do. Instead, it was a grudging, piecemeal admission, attempts to minimize his actions, to blame Laura, to deflect. But the evidence spoke louder than his twisted justifications. Mark was arrested and charged with multiple felonies, including kidnapping, aggravated assault, and false imprisonment. The subsequent trial was arduous for Laura, forcing her to relive the trauma. But her courage in testifying, supported by the mountain of physical and digital evidence our team had gathered, was undeniable. The jury saw through Mark's attempts to portray himself as the victim of a vindictive wife. He was found guilty on all significant charges and received a substantial prison sentence. For Laura, it was the beginning of a long, difficult road to healing, but it was also a liberation. The legal system, in this instance, worked. Justice, though it could never erase the scars, provided a measure of closure and ensured Mark could no longer harm her or anyone else. This case serves as a stark reminder that the most dangerous prisons are not always built of stone and steel, but of fear and manipulation, often within the supposed sanctity of a home. Mark's conviction brought a legal end to Laura's nightmare, but the echoes of such profound betrayal and cruelty linger long after the courtroom doors close. It highlights the terrifying reality of how someone can present a perfectly normal, even charming face to the world, while perpetrating unimaginable horrors in private. The dual nature of man, capable of such calculated cruelty under a veneer of love, is something that even after all my years in law enforcement I find deeply unsettling. Laura's journey to reclaim her life, her sense of self, would be long and arduous. The physical wounds healed, but the psychological trauma, the betrayal by someone who vowed to protect and cherish her, leaves scars that are far deeper and more complex. We, as investigators, see the immediate aftermath. We gather the evidence, we pursue justice. But the true cost of such crimes is borne by the victims day after day as they fight to rebuild what was so violently torn apart. It's a testament to human resilience that survivors like Laura find the strength to move forward, to find peace, even after enduring such darkness. This case, like so many others, underscores the vital importance of listening to that nagging feeling, that intuition when something seems off, just as Laura's sister did. Sometimes, one person's courage to speak up is all it takes to bring a hidden evil to light. If stories like this make you think, share this video. Sometimes awareness is the first form of prevention, and don't forget to leave your like.